if you get this one wrong, things are going to escalate. And not only are you going to be dealing with a toxic coworker, you are going to be dealing with a toxic AF work environment. Hello and welcome back to my channel where I help you slay your career and cultivate the successful life you deserve. For the best career success advice on the www, click the subscription button and the notification bell. I release 2 new videos each week. Your coworker is toxic AF. And if you're really unlucky, you have a whole group of toxic coworkers. While I have a ton of videos on my channel to deal with all types of difficult coworkers, like the jealous coworker and the nosy coworker, I've gotten a few requests to just talk about toxic coworkers in general, where it's not necessarily that they're one of those things, but your toxic coworker is a mix, if not all of those things. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 6 strategies to deal with a toxic coworker. And if you stay all the way to the end, I actually have a little bonus for you. But let's not spend any more time talking about what we're going to talk about. Let's just tap that like button and jump right into it. The first thing you need to do in order to deal with a toxic coworker is to stop taking their bait. Your coworker, who just so happens to be toxic AF, is probably trying to get a rise out of you, and maybe it's been working. The thing about toxic coworkers is that they like to drag people down to their unfortunate level where they're residing down there, and they are going to make you feel bad. They're going to try to trigger you in order to help them accomplish their mission of making everyone's lives as miserable as their own. But just because they're putting that bait out there doesn't mean that you need to snack on it. I don't know about you, but I prefer Haagen-Dazs to toxicity myself. I know this is easier said than done, but when you do recognize the pattern and what they're actually intending to do, and that quite frankly your toxic coworkers do have malintent when they're doing this, it becomes easier to recognize the pattern when it actually happens and for you to adjust how you actually react. Does it mean that you need to not have any emotions and be totally neutral about it? No, but having an emotion about something doesn't mean that you have to react to the thing, especially when that reaction would be falling directly into the trap that they are setting for you. And one of the things that's really going to help you do this is actually my next tip to deal with a toxic coworker, and that is to set boundaries. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I've started talking a lot about boundaries around these parts. Boundaries are really important for most people to have healthy and productive relationships. And in the case of your toxic coworker, the purpose of that boundary is to mitigate the damage that they could potentially do to you and your psyche. And the best boundaries that you can lay are the ones that I describe as falling into the category of not feeding the trolls. Boundaries like refusing to gossip about coworkers, which is going to decrease your likelihood of being ensnared in the gossip yourself, is a really good place to start. I've also spoken before on my channel about making sure that you're not oversharing and that you're not giving a lot of personal information that you don't want to be company fodder away, especially when your toxic coworker is involved, no matter how nosy they are. Another boundary that is especially important to set with a toxic coworker is making sure that you are confident and assertive, especially when it comes to saying no. Now, of course, on these boundary topics, I have a bunch of videos, which I will drop the links in down below for you to check out the one that makes most sense for you after you're done watching this one. And drawing from this one, I think is the most important strategy when you are dealing with a toxic coworker, because if you get this one wrong, things are going to escalate. And not only are you going to be dealing with a toxic coworker, you are going to be dealing with a toxic AF work environment. When you're working with a toxic coworker, you need to know when to push back and when to ignore them. Let me explain. Sometimes your toxic coworker is going to intentionally push boundaries. They're going to, let's just quite frankly say it, they're going to try to piss you off. As we've already talked about, they're trying to get a reaction from you. They're trying to make you basically hurt yourself at work in a way that's going to make them look all innocent, of course. One of the most important things that you can do when you are working with a toxic coworker is recognize where you should let those things go, where you shouldn't react, where you shouldn't put up a fight, because quite frankly, it's going to end up making you look bad and hurting your career, and when you absolutely should be pushing back and enforcing those boundaries. For example, your toxic coworker may have a habit of undermining you in meetings and being overly critical of any idea that you put out. And most of the time in a case like this, they're doing it publicly in front of other people, and really in most cases, they are going to be creating a negative impression for themselves instead of creating a negative impression about you. But in some cases, they might be throwing up unnecessary obstacles, and that might actually be having a direct and negative impact to your team and to your company. In cases like that, this might actually be a scenario where you actually choose to push back. As you can tell from this example, this is actually a little bit hard for me to give clear and concrete rules and examples in a video because this does become really personal. So ultimately, this does come up to you and using your discretion, and when you need it, do seek the advice of mentors, or even if you have a trusting relationship and the toxic person isn't your manager, talk to them and get input on how to actually best proceed. And if you do want to drop details into the comments, I will do my best to help you out. Now, in those instances where you are deciding that you're just going to let it go, you are going to do your best to ignore it, that actually brings me into my next tip to deal with toxic coworkers, and that is to be blissfully unaware of it, or at least seem like you are. When your toxic coworker is acting like an a-hole, you don't acknowledge it at all. And even when you know their intent is bad, react as though they have the best, most positive intent. One thing that I love about doing this is when you are assuming positive intent and reacting or acting as such, it does give your toxic coworker the opportunity to be a better person. And I sincerely believe that people will live up to the expectations that you set for them or down to them. So when you have a good expectation, they're going to rise to the occasion. But I do need to caution you that sometimes this can be very triggering to your toxic coworker because, well, they're a toxic person. And sometimes this can actually cause them to escalate. So do, again, knowing what you know about your toxic coworker, do choose this one accordingly. The next thing that you can do to cope with a toxic coworker is do your best to minimize your interactions with them. I know when your toxic coworker is on your team, or let's just face it, when you have a team of toxic coworkers, this isn't always possible. But when it is an option, find ways that you can minimize your personal interaction with them. And even though I do think that the medium is rife for miscommunications, which can actually escalate, sometimes when you're working with toxic coworkers, keeping your communications to digital channels like email, Slack, or instant messenger can actually be beneficial. This is going to give a paper trail, which is something that you can actually go back to in case your toxic coworker really decides to up the ante. In most cases, this is not going to be necessary, and in fact, in-person interactions are going to be something that helps keep you guys aligned even when they are difficult to work with. Another thing that you can do is to map your way around them. And this is something that you can do by actually mapping the impact that you want to achieve in order to advance in your career and making sure that you develop the right network and the right contacts to do that. This is something that I actually get into in my free workshop that I'm going to link down below in case you want to check it out. One of the most common things that toxic coworkers do is actually obstruct your progress and really get in the way of what you're trying to do at work. If they have an opportunity to keep you from hitting your KPIs or your MBOs, your toxic coworker is going to spring into action on that opportunity. And one of the main ways that they like to do this is by withholding information. And that brings me into the next tip to deal with your toxic coworker. And that is when you do have to work with your toxic coworker and you do have to communicate with them, do your best to ask closed questions. This means that when you need a piece of information from your toxic coworker, it needs to originate at minimum with a yes or no question. For example, instead of saying, hey, let me know when the customer gets back to us, and then trusting your toxic coworker to actually keep you in the loop, what you can do is you can actually follow up. Have you heard from the customer yet? Because this is going to be yes or a no, and they most likely do not want to sabotage their own career by lying to you. They're going to see yes when they actually have, and this is going to give you the information that you need to work forward with. And as much as possible when it comes to dealing with toxic coworkers, I do encourage you to use these more simple, more binary questions with them in order to optimize your communication and minimize the opportunity for misunderstanding or misconstruing what is being said. And that brings me into my bonus tip to deal with a toxic coworker, and that is to be positive. I know that you guys are probably sick of me saying this again and again and again, but it is really important. Your toxic coworker is a negative force in your life, and you are forced to work with them, and they are going to be in your sphere. And I don't mean to get all hippy-dippy on you, but let's just face it, that is going to enter your energy field, and it is something that you can absorb. As much as possible, I want you to make sure that you are cultivating positivity, both in your interactions and for yourself, especially after you've had an interaction with your toxic coworker. If you don't really know how to do this, I want you to go and check out this video right now, because it's actually going to to break it down for you. If this video gave you some tips that you know are going to help you deal with your toxic coworker, make sure and give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. As always, thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.